My name is Margaret, and at 72, I thought I'd seen every kind of heartbreak life could offer. I was wrong. It was December 23rd in suburban Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the snow was falling like powdered sugar outside my kitchen window. I'd been waiting by the phone all week for Sarah, my daughter, to call with details about Christmas dinner. We'd celebrated together for 35 years, ever since she was born. Even after her father died 3 years ago, even after she married David 2 years later, Christmas was our tradition. The call never came. Instead, I heard it through my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who mentioned seeing Sarah at the grocery store buying a massive turkey. "She seemed surprised when I asked if you were hosting this year," Mrs. Henderson said, her wrinkled face creasing with concern. "Said something about keeping it small this time, small, without me." I sat in my empty living room, staring at the wrapped presents I'd carefully chosen for my grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake. The silence was deafening. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my heart with invisible hands. How could Sarah exclude me? How could she let David make this decision? I picked up the phone 3 times to call her, but pride stopped me each time. If they didn't want me there, I wouldn't beg. But as Christmas Eve approached, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about my right to be part of my family, about my grandchildren's right to have their grandmother present for Christmas. David had been systematically pushing me out of their lives, making snide comments about boundaries and nuclear family. Time. Well, I decided, boundaries work both ways. The next evening, Christmas Day, I put on my best red dress, the one Sarah always said made my eyes sparkle. I grabbed the presents and my famous apple pie that Emma begged for every year. If they wanted to exclude me, they'd have to do it to my face. I deserved better than being erased from my own family's Christmas. My hands shook as I started my old Buick, but my resolve was steel. The 20-minute drive to their house in the upscale Edina neighborhood felt like a lifetime. I'd helped them with the down payment on that house, back when David was still pretending to respect me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Christmas lights twinkled on every house except theirs. David always said decorations were wasteful commercialism. I parked in their driveway right behind David's BMW and walked to the front door. Through the window, I could see the warm glow of their dining room, hear the faint sound of laughter, my grandchildren's laughter. Without me, I didn't knock. I still had my key from when I used to babysit. I turned it slowly, stepped inside, and walked toward the voices. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rounded the corner into the dining room. The room went completely silent. Sarah dropped her fork. David's face went white, then red. Emma and Jake looked up with confused smiles, not understanding the tension. "Grandma," Emma started to say, but David's sharp look silenced her. "Margaret," David said, his voice cold as the Minnesota winter outside. "We weren't expecting you." I stood in the doorway, apple pie in my hands, dignity wrapped around me like armor. "I know," I said quietly. "That's exactly the problem. Tell me where you're watching this video from in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you want to see what happens next. Will Margaret stand her ground, or will David succeed in pushing her out of the family forever?" The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I could hear the grandfather clock in their hallway ticking, counting the seconds of this impossible moment. Sarah's eyes darted between David and me, her face pale as fresh snow. The dining room, usually warm and welcoming, felt like a courtroom. "Mom," Sarah finally whispered, "what are you doing here?" What was I doing here? I was fighting for my family. I was refusing to be disappeared by a man who thought he could rewrite our history. "I'm here for Christmas dinner with my family," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, like we've done for 35 years. David stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. He was a tall man, used to intimidating people in his corporate job, used to getting his way. "Margaret, this is inappropriate. We discussed having a quiet family Christmas this year." "We?" I set the pie down on their expensive console table. "I don't recall being part of any discussion." Emma, bless her heart, wiggled out of her chair. "Grandma, did you bring presents? And did you make your apple pie? Daddy said we couldn't have pie this year because sugar is bad for us." I knelt down to her level, ignoring David's sharp intake of breath. "Of course I brought presents, sweetheart. And yes, I made your favorite pie." "Margaret," David's voice carried a warning, "the children are on a specific diet plan. We can't have them consuming processed sugars, and it's one day a year, David." I stood up, looking him directly in the eyes. "It's Christmas." Sarah finally found her voice. "Mom, maybe we should talk privately." "No." I shook my head. "I'm tired of private conversations that exclude me from public celebrations. I'm tired of tiptoeing around David's rules and regulations. This is my family too." The words hung in the air like smoke. David's jaw clenched, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to maintain control of the situation. Sarah looked like she might cry. "Grandma, are you mad at Daddy?" little Jake asked, his 5-year-old intuition picking up on the tension. "I'm not mad at anyone, baby," I said, though it wasn't entirely true. "I'm just sad that no one told Grandma about Christmas dinner." "I told Mommy we should call you," Emma said innocently. "But Daddy said families need boundaries." Out of the mouths of babes. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with heartbreak. My granddaughter had wanted me here. They both had. David's face flushed deeper. "Emma, that's not what I said. I said that nuclear families sometimes need space to create their own traditions." "What's a nuclear family?" Jake asked. "It means just Mommy, Daddy, and you kids," Sarah explained quietly. "But what about Grandma?" Emma asked. "Isn't she family too?" The question hit like a lightning bolt. I watched Sarah's face crumble slightly, watched David struggle for an answer that wouldn't make him look like the villain he was becoming. "Of course Grandma is family," Sarah said quickly. "It's just complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's not complicated at all. Either I'm family or I'm not. Either I matter to this family or I don't. And if I don't matter enough to be invited to Christmas dinner, then I need to know that." The room fell silent again. I could hear my own heartbeat, could smell the turkey and mashed potatoes that should have been shared with me. This was the moment of truth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if you're invested in Margaret's story. Will Sarah stand up to David, or will Margaret have to fight this battle alone? The truth hung in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. I watched my daughter's face as she wrestled with 35 years of Christmas memories against 2 years of marriage to a man who saw me as a threat to his authority. "Mom," Sarah said softly, "sit down. Please." I remained standing. "I'll sit." When someone explains to me why my own daughter didn't invite me to Christmas dinner, David cleared his throat, straightening his tie even though we were at home. Everything about him was always so controlled, so calculated. Margaret, Sarah, and I felt it was important to establish our own family traditions. We can't always rely on extended family for every holiday. Extended family? The words hit me like a slap. I'm her mother. I'm their grandmother. Since when am I extended family? Since you started undermining our parenting decisions, David shot back, his composure finally cracking. Since you started filling the children's heads with ideas that contradict our values. What ideas? I demanded. That it's okay to have dessert? That Christmas should be about joy instead of dietary restrictions? That grandparents matter? Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping. "Stop it, both of you. The children are right here." But I was done protecting David's feelings. Then maybe David should explain to the children why their grandmother wasn't invited to Christmas dinner. "Go ahead, David. Tell Emma and Jake why families need boundaries that exclude the woman who helped raise their mother." "You didn't raise me alone, Mom," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, your father helped until cancer took him. But I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every Christmas morning until David decided I was too much trouble." Emma tugged on my dress. "Grandma, why is everyone yelling?" I knelt down again, taking her small hands in mine. "Because sometimes adults forget how to use their words nicely when they're hurt." "Are you hurt, Grandma?" The innocent question broke something inside me. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm very hurt." "Did Daddy hurt your feelings?" Jake asked, looking between David and me with wide eyes. David opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "Your daddy thinks that families are like companies with rules and hierarchies. But I think families are like gardens where everyone has room to grow together." "What does that mean?" Emma asked. "It means that love doesn't have boundaries, sweetheart. It means that when you love someone, you include them. You don't push them away." Sarah sat back down heavily. "Mom, it's not that simple, isn't it?" I stood up, looking at my daughter, really looking at her. When had she become so thin? When had those worry lines appeared around her eyes? "Sarah, when did you stop fighting? For what you believe in?" "I fight for my marriage," she said quietly. "By sacrificing your mother? By teaching your children that love is conditional? By letting your husband erase 3 decades of family tradition?" David slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses jump. "That's enough. This is exactly why we needed space. You're manipulative. Margaret, you use guilt and emotion to control situations. And you use isolation and intimidation," I fired back. "At least I do it with love." The room went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Sarah was staring at her plate, tears threatening to fall. The children looked scared and confused. David looked like he wanted to throw me out physically. But I wasn't done. Not yet. "Sarah," I said gently, "look at me." She raised her eyes, and I saw the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to beg me to tell her stories about princesses who saved themselves. "When did you stop being brave?" The question hit its target. Sarah's face crumpled, and she began to cry. Really cry, like she hadn't in years. Sarah's tears fell like the first drops of a spring rain, washing away years of carefully constructed pretense. David immediately moved to comfort her, but she shook her head, holding up her hand to stop him. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." The children watched with wide, frightened eyes as their mother cried. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew this moment was necessary. Sometimes you have to break before you can heal. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Jake asked, his voice small and scared. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin, trying to compose herself. "Because Grandma asked me a very important question, and I don't like my answer." David's face had gone from red to pale. "Sarah, you're upset. Maybe we should—" "When did I stop being brave?" Sarah repeated my question, looking directly at David. "I used to be brave. I used to stand up for what I believed in. I used to defend the people I loved." "You do defend us," David said quickly. "You defend our family every day." "Do I?" Sarah's voice grew stronger. "Or do I just go along with whatever you say to avoid conflict?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. I could see David's carefully constructed world beginning to crack. "Sarah, you're being emotional. Stop." Sarah's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Stop telling me I'm being emotional when I'm finally being honest." She turned to me, her eyes red but clearer than I'd seen them in months. "Mom, I stopped being brave the day I let David convince me that loving you meant being disloyal to him. I stopped being brave when I started believing that including you in our lives somehow made our marriage weaker." "That's not what I said," David protested. "Isn't it?" Sarah stood up again, and this time her movements were deliberate, purposeful. "You've spent 2 years systematically removing my mother from our lives. First it was, maybe she shouldn't come. to every dinner. Then it was, the kids need structure, not constant grandparent visits. Then it was, we need to establish boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. Isolation isn't. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. And that's what you've been doing, David. You've been isolating me from my mother, the woman who raised me, who taught me about love and resilience and standing up for what's right. Emma had been listening with the intense focus that children bring to adult conversations they're not supposed to understand. Daddy, did you make Grandma sad on purpose? The innocence of the question hit David like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, then at Jake, then at Sarah, and finally at me. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely uncertain. I was trying to protect our family. From what? I asked quietly. From love? From tradition? From me? From interference, he said. But the words sounded hollow, even to him. David, Sarah said, her voice now steady and strong. My mother isn't interference. She's family. She's the woman who worked 2 jobs to put me through college. She's the woman who held my hand through labor with both kids. She's the woman who brought us soup when we were sick and watched the children when we needed date nights. She undermines. She loves. Sarah's voice rose. She loves us, David. Completely. Unconditionally, without agenda. When was the last time you could say the same? The question hit its mark. David's face went white, then red, then white again. He looked around the room as if seeing it clearly for the first time. His wife crying, his children confused and scared, his mother-in-law standing with quiet dignity despite being excluded and humiliated. He started, then stopped. You what, David? Sarah pressed. You were protecting us? From Christmas dinner with Grandma? From homemade apple pie? From unconditional love? The silence that followed was different from all the others. This one was full of recognition, of truths finally being spoken, of a family finding its way back to itself. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. The confrontation is reaching its peak. Will David finally admit his mistakes, or will this family be torn apart forever? The silence stretched like a bridge between our old life and whatever came next. David stood there, his corporate confidence finally cracking, revealing something raw and almost vulnerable underneath. Emma had climbed into Sarah's lap, sensing the weight of the moment even if she couldn't understand it fully. I was scared, David finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission shocked everyone, including David himself. He sat down heavily, as if the words had drained him of strength. Scared of what? Sarah asked, her anger softening. Slightly, of not being enough. He looked up at me, then back at Sarah. Your mother, she's everything I'm not. She's warm, spontaneous, generous with her emotions. The kids light up when she walks in the room. You light up when she calls. I felt my own anger beginning to shift. This wasn't what I had expected. And you thought excluding me would fix that? I asked. I thought creating distance would help me compete. The word came out like a confession, at church. I thought if you weren't always there, maybe the kids would come to me for comfort. Maybe Sarah would depend on me more. Oh, David, Sarah said softly. You can't manufacture love by eliminating competition. I know that now. He put his head in his hands. God, I know that now. Sitting here watching Emma ask where Grandma was for the 3rd time today. Watching Jake save his carrots because he wanted to share them with you. I realized I hadn't created more love. I'd just created less joy. Emma squirmed in Sarah's lap to look at her father. Daddy, you were scared. Of Grandma? Not scared of her, sweetheart. Scared that you wouldn't love me as much if she was around. That's silly, Jake announced with 5-year-old certainty. Love isn't like pie. When you share pie, there's less for everyone. But when you share love, there's more for everyone. The wisdom of children. I felt tears prick my eyes. Jake's right, I said quietly. David, I never wanted to replace you in their lives. I wanted to add to their lives. There's room in their hearts for both of us. I see that now, he said. I see a lot of things now, like how controlling I've become, how I've been trying to manage our family like a business merger instead of nurturing it like a garden. He looked at me when he said that last word, acknowledging my earlier metaphor. Sarah shifted Emma in her lap and reached across the table to touch David's hand. We can fix this. We can do better. Can we? David looked around the table. I've hurt everyone here. I've turned Christmas into a battleground. I've made my children confused about love and loyalty. I've turned my wife against her mother. You didn't turn me against Mom, Sarah said firmly. I let myself be turned. That's on me. I'm the one who stopped calling as much. I'm the one who didn't speak up when you started making decisions about our family that should have been conversations. Because I made it clear that speaking up would cause problems, David admitted. I manipulated the situation to get my way. The honesty was brutal and beautiful at the same time. I watched this man I'd seen as my enemy begin to reveal himself as someone wounded and human and capable of growth. So, what now? I asked. David looked at each of us in turn. Emma and Jake, confused but hopeful. Sarah, tired but determined. And finally me, standing in their dining room with my apple pie and my wounded heart and my stubborn love. Now, he said, I ask for your forgiveness, and I ask you to stay for Christmas dinner, and I ask you to help us figure out how to be a real family again. Emma clapped her hands. Can we have pie? Despite everything, we all laughed. Even David managed a small smile. Yes, he said, we can definitely have pie. But I knew this was just the beginning. Apologies were easy. Change was hard. And I wasn't sure if David was ready for the real work that lay ahead. The laughter felt tentative, like the first few notes of a song you're not sure you remember how to play. I remained standing, studying David's face. Words were easy. I'd learned that lesson the hard way over 7 decades of life. Actions were what mattered. David, I said carefully, apologies are a good start. But forgiveness requires change, real change. He nodded slowly. I know. And I know I can't just flip a switch and undo 2 years of control and manipulation. Daddy, what's manipulation? Emma asked. David took a deep breath. It's when someone tries to make other people do what they want by making them feel bad or confused instead of just asking honestly. Like when I pretend to be sick so I don't have to eat vegetables? Jake asked. Exactly like that, buddy. Except Daddy did it about much more important things. Sarah squeezed Emma tighter. The important thing is that we're talking about it now. We're being honest. Talking is good, I said, but I need to know this isn't just Christmas guilt. I need to know that when New Year's comes and Valentine's Day and Easter, I won't suddenly become extended family again. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard. My father was military, he said suddenly. Everything was about hierarchy, control, discipline. Emotions were weakness. Family was a unit that operated efficiently, or it didn't operate at all. That's not family, I said gently. That's a corporation. I know that now. But for 38 years, it's all I knew. When I married Sarah, I thought I was supposed to be the commanding officer of our household. I thought love meant control. What changed your mind? Sarah asked. He turned back to us, and I could see tears in his eyes, watching Emma save half her dessert last week because she wanted to share it with Grandma. Watching Jake draw you a picture for Christmas that he hid in his room because he knew I wouldn't approve. Realizing that my children were learning to hide their love because I'd made love feel dangerous. The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about all the times Emma had whispered, "Don't tell Daddy I asked about Grandma." All the times Jake had looked over his shoulder before giving me an extra hug. They shouldn't have to choose, I said. No one should have to choose, David agreed. Sarah shouldn't have to choose between her husband and her mother. The kids shouldn't have to choose between their father's approval and their grandmother's love. I created a war where there should have been abundance. Emma climbed down from Sarah's lap and walked over to David. Daddy, are you sad? Yes, sweetheart. I'm very sad that I made bad choices that hurt people I love. It's okay, she said, taking his hand. Grandma says mistakes are just chances to do better next time. David looked at me over Emma's head. Is that true? Do I get a chance to do better? The question was loaded with more than just words. It was asking for grace, for time, for the opportunity to rebuild trust that had been systematically eroded. Everyone gets chances to do better, I said. But trust has to be earned back, David, day by day, choice by choice. What would that look like? He asked. It looks like including me in birthday planning instead of making decisions for my grandchildren without consulting me. It looks like family dinners where my opinions matter, not just your rules. It looks like teaching the children that love is additive, not competitive. Sarah stood up, smoothing her dress. It looks like me finding my voice again, too. I've been quiet too long. I want to try, David said. I want to learn how to be part of a family instead of trying to run one. Jake tugged on my skirt. Grandma, does this mean you can come to my birthday party? When's your birthday, sweetheart? Next month, and I want a dinosaur cake. I looked at David. This was the first test. Would he deflect, make excuses, try to control the narrative? We'll plan it together, he said, looking directly at me. All of us. And yes, we'll make sure there's a dinosaur cake. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Margaret and David are finding common ground. But will this fragile peace survive the real challenges ahead? The next 2 hours passed like a gentle dream after a long nightmare. We ate Christmas dinner together, reheated turkey, lukewarm mashed, potatoes, and room-temperature vegetables that somehow tasted better than any meal I'd had in months. The children chattered about their presents. David asked genuine questions about my week, and Sarah smiled more than I'd seen her smile in 2 years. But I knew the real test would come later, when the holiday glow faded and real life resumed. Mom, Sarah said as we cleared the dishes together, I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me anything, sweetheart. I owe you honesty. She paused, holding a serving bowl against her chest like armor. I've been losing myself piece by piece. Every time David made a unilateral decision about our family, every time I stayed quiet to keep the peace, I lost a little more of who I used to be. And who did you used to be? Someone like you, she said softly. Someone who spoke up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. Someone who believed that love was worth fighting for. We stood in their modern kitchen, surrounded by granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that somehow felt cold despite the warm conversation. You can be that person again, I said. I want to be. But I'm scared, Mom. What if standing up for myself means my marriage falls apart? It was the question I'd been dreading, because I knew the answer might be painful for both of us. Then it falls apart, I said gently. Sarah, a marriage that requires you to disappear isn't a marriage worth saving. She nodded, tears starting again. I know. I think I've known for a while. From the living room, we could hear David reading The Night Before Christmas to Emma and Jake, his voice animated and warm. He was trying. I could see that. But trying wasn't the same as changing, and change wasn't the same as healing the damage that had been done. He's not a bad man, Sarah said, as if reading my thoughts. No, I agreed. But he's been a bad husband and a controlling father. The question is whether he can learn to be different. And if he can't? I put my arm around my daughter, feeling how thin she'd become, how fragile. Then you'll remember who you are, and you'll choose yourself and your children. And I'll be right there beside you, whatever you decide. The promise hung between us like a bridge back to ourselves. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, David approached me privately. "Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do I earn back their trust? Really earn it, not just perform it?" The question told me he understood the difference, which was encouraging. "You show up," I said, "consistently, humbly, without expectation of immediate forgiveness. You ask before you decide. You listen before you speak. You make their happiness as important as your comfort. And if I mess up, you will mess up. We all do. The difference is what you do next. Do you justify and defend, or do you acknowledge and adjust?" He nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for staying, for fighting for them, for not giving up on us." As I drove home through the snowy streets of Minneapolis, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not certainty. Hope was different from certainty. Hope acknowledged that things could still go wrong, but chose to believe they could also go right. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. I love you." I pulled over to respond. "I love you too. And you were brave today. The bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's scary." Another text. "David wants to know if you're free for dinner next Sunday." His idea. I smiled. Typing back, "Tell him I'd be delighted. Should I bring dessert?" "Always," came her immediate reply. It was a small beginning, but all the best changes started small. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making my famous apple pie for Jake's birthday party. But this time was different. This time, David had called me personally to ask what flavor cake Jake might prefer. And when I mentioned he'd been talking about wanting something with chocolate and dinosaurs, David had laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Then chocolate dinosaur cake it is." The changes hadn't been perfect or immediate. There had been setbacks, moments when David reverted to his controlling instincts, or when Sarah retreated into old patterns of avoidance. But each time, they caught themselves faster, communicated more openly, and chose connection over conflict. The real breakthrough had come 6 weeks after Christmas, when Emma had been invited to a sleepover that David initially wanted to refuse, because it was too much stimulation for a school night. Instead of making a unilateral decision, he'd called a family meeting. They'd discussed the pros and cons together, listened to Emma's perspective, and agreed on a compromise. She could go, but they'd have a quiet day the following Saturday to recharge. It was such a small thing, but it represented everything that had been missing: respect, collaboration, and the understanding that family decisions should be family discussions. Sarah had started therapy, initially to work through her feelings about our Christmas confrontation, but increasingly to rediscover her own voice and identity. She'd also started working part-time at a nonprofit, something she'd talked about for years but never pursued because David thought it was impractical. "I forgot how good I am at fighting for causes I believe in," she'd told me last week. "I just stopped believing our family was worth fighting for." Now, as I arranged candles on Jake's dinosaur cake, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us here. My uninvited arrival at Christmas dinner had been an act of desperation, but it had become an act of salvation, not just for my relationship with my family, but for all of us. The doorbell rang, and I heard Emma's voice calling, "Grandma, we're here for the party." I opened the door to find my entire family on my doorstep, Sarah carrying balloons, David holding a present that looked suspiciously like the large Lego dinosaur set Jake had been wanting, and my grandchildren practically vibrating with excitement. "Grandma, Daddy says you made a chocolate dinosaur cake," Jake announced, throwing his arms around my waist. "I did indeed. And your daddy helped me pick out the perfect dinosaur candles." Jake looked up at David with pure adoration. "You helped? Grandma did all the hard work," David said, meeting my eyes with a smile that held 2 months of gratitude and growth. I just listened to what you wanted and passed along the message. It was a perfect metaphor for how our family functioned. Now, David had learned to listen, I had learned to trust, and Sarah had learned to speak up. The children had learned that love wasn't a competition and that families could disagree without declaring war. As we gathered around my dining room table to sing Happy Birthday, I looked at each face illuminated by 5 dinosaur-shaped candles. This wasn't the same family that had sat in stunned silence 3 months ago. This was something new, something rebuilt from honesty and hard work and the radical decision to choose love over control. Jake blew out his candles and immediately asked, "Can we all make wishes together?" "That's not how birthday wishes work, buddy," Sarah said gently. "But I want everyone to have wishes that come true," he insisted. David looked around the table, then back at Jake. "You know what? I think Jake's right. Let's all make wishes together." We closed our eyes, 5 people who had nearly lost each other, now holding hands around a chocolate dinosaur cake, making wishes that had already started coming true. When we opened our eyes, Emma asked, "What did everyone wish for?" "I wished for more birthdays just like this one," I said. "I wished for more chances to do better," David said. "I wished for courage to keep speaking up," Sarah said. "I wished for chocolate cake every day," Emma announced, making everyone laugh. "And I wished for dinosaurs to be real again," Jake said solemnly. "Well," David said, standing up to cut the cake, 4 out of 5 wishes granted isn't bad. We'll keep working on the dinosaurs." As laughter filled my dining room, I realized that sometimes the most important fights are the ones that bring families together instead of tearing them apart. Sometimes showing up uninvited is exactly the invitation love needs to find its way home. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button if Margaret's story touched your heart. Sometimes standing up for family means standing up to family, and sometimes that's exactly what love looks like.